ברוכות הבאות, שבוע טוב and מועד טוב. Thank you for tuning in to our weekly edition of Torah classes. And whether you're logging on to Torah Anytime or to ohelsara.com, or if you're a YouTube subscriber and you're following the channel, thank you so very much for constantly tuning in and enhancing your life and elevating your souls with the teachings of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Torah, HaKadosha, the Holy Torah. We are now beginning the Chol HaMoed portion of Pesach, the intermediary days before the second holiday begins. So we're able to film and do all kinds of creative activities, melacha. We are now up to class number 3 in a 5-part series of classes that we began right before Pesach, through Pesach, and after Pesach. And this particular class was sponsored specifically by a few people. First and foremost, Yana Normatov. Thank you so very much, the spearheader of all of our campaigns. Thank you so much to you, to your family, to all those who always somehow around your circles manage to help us with donations. Hashem yishmor atkhem v'yivarech atkhem v'yimale et kol mishalot libchem letova u'livracha. You should just see nachat from your children and Be'ezrat Hashem grandchildren la'atid lavo. To Eliana Morgan, who contributed, to Jody Lynn Johnson, who contributed, and to Joseph Reichman, who contributed to this particular class. A couple of you emailed us last week before the holiday, before Pesach, about the classes, asking if it's okay if you sponsor past the 5 classes. Sure, you can sponsor a class anytime and you can dedicate it, whether it's to the Ilui Neshama of a loved one, the elevation of the soul of a loved one, to the refuah shlema of somebody that you know, the speedy recovery, to just the general overall success. You could always log on to www.ohelsara.com. Click on the donation button. Right now we're offering these next few classes for $360 for whoever wants to donate. You could also partner up, like these people did, partner up and donate it as much as you can and have somebody else donate and collaborate on a class. But you should just know that to sponsor a Torah class that's being spread and viewed throughout the world is a big merit for you. So again, you guys emailed me asking me if you can donate past the 5 classes because you felt maybe you wouldn't be able to before the Pesach season. Absolutely. Log on to www.ohelsara.com and click on the donate button. Just do me a favor. In the memo when you donate, please designate that you're donating it for this specific class, meaning the upcoming class, and who you're dedicating this in honor of. Okay, so ladies, we have a lot of work to do today. On the second night of Pesach, the Sefirat omer, the counting of the omer, began. And we're going to be counting for 49 days until we reach the pinnacle of the celebratory season. That's when we'll celebrate Matan Torah, the giving of the Holy Torah by Hashem to the chosen nation, Am Yisrael. Question is, what should we be considering and contemplating during this 49-day countdown? Recently, we read the Haftarah of the Metzoraim. The Haftarah actually appears in Sefer Melachim Bet, the book of Kings 2, second book. And there's a fascinating story that I want to recount concerning 4 men stricken with leprosy who had to reside outside the Jewish encampment, Michutz LaMachaneh. The story takes place during the times of the first Bet HaMikdash, when the Syrian army came upon the northern kingdom of Eretz Israel, and they laid siege to the city of Shomron. Because of the siege, all the supplies, including food and water, were cut off from the Jewish people who were living inside the city. And as you can imagine, that caused a horrendous hunger to the extent that people were forced to sadly eat human flesh in order to survive. It was a terrible, terrible time in Am Yisrael. But at the point of the war story and its effects, the narrative suddenly shifts from what's happening inside the walls of the city to a scene that took place outside the city. And that's where our story concerning the 4 lepers begins. They too were starving because they were lepers, and all lepers have to be quarantined outside the city, and they relied on the food that was supplied from inside the city. And since no food was coming out, and they were starving, actually they were starving to death, they said one to the other the following: Ma anachnu yoshvim po ad matnu. Why are we just sitting here until we die? Im amarnu navo ha'ir. If we say we should go into the city, v'harav ba'ir, while there's a famine in the city, v'matnu sham, we'll die over there. Ve'im yashavnu po, and if we stay here, v'matnu, we'll die. Ve'ata, and now, lechu v'nifla al machane aram. Let us go and defect to the Aramean camp, to the enemy camp. Im yachayunu nichya. If they'll spare us, we'll live. Ve'im yamitunu v'matnu. And if they kill us, we'll die. These men felt they had 3 options. The first is they could march back into their city and try to get in. But what would be the point? There wasn't any food inside the city. The second option was to march forward where the Syrian army was encamped, because the Syrians had plenty of food, plenty of supplies. But if they do that, they might be killed on sight, since they were lepers and they were the enemy. The third option was to just sit there outside the city walls and do nothing and die from starvation without any complication. But it was out of this deep distress that they said to each other, why should we just sit here until we die? So in the evening, they decided to get up and march directly into the Syrian camp. And it was then that they saw something extraordinary happen. Hashem made it happen, made a miracle, that the Syrian troops suddenly imagined in their minds that they heard the noise of hundreds and hundreds of chariots approaching, and they imagined in their minds the sound of the pounding of hundreds and hundreds of horses' hooves. They were convinced that they hear the clashing of thousands of swords as if the enemy is approaching. And then the Syrian army panicked and they abandoned their camp. They left their tents, their armor, their horses, their chariots, and all the food and supplies behind. They thought that the Jews hired probably the Egyptian and Hittite armies to attack them. So they all fled for their lives and they left everything behind. And these 4 lepers saw this miracle happening before their very eyes. So after the Syrian army fled, these lepers ran into one of the abandoned Syrian tents, and they ate and drank and took the silver and the gold that was left behind. They went from one tent to the next, collecting the spoils of war and hiding them. But then they thought about it, and they said to each other, Lo chen anachnu osim. What we're doing This is not right. This is not our way. Hayom hazayom besorahu. Today is a day of good news. A great miracle happened over here. Va'anachnu mochshim, and we're being quiet about it. We should notify our brothers and sisters inside the city wall that a great miracle has occurred, that the war is over and the Syrian army has fled. But if we wait until the morning light and we don't notify them, umatzanu avon, we'll incur guilt. We will have sinned. Ve'ata, and now, lechu v'navoa v'nagida bet hamelech. Let us go and tell what we've learned to the king's household. So the 4 lepers notified the guard at the gate of the city about the good news, but the gatekeeper had a hard time convincing the king that the Syrians had indeed fled and were not planning on ambushing us. Only after the king sent some of his soldiers to scout out the enemy camp did the news come back to him that the Syrian army had fled and left behind all their belongings and an enormous amount of food. Of course, all the Jewish people ran out of this city to take whatever food they could find. And the nevuah, the prophecy that Elisha Hanavi alav shalom told the king the day before, was fulfilled. Elisha told the king that although today the situation appears bleak and hopeless, tomorrow there is going to be a great miracle and a salvation. That's exactly what took place. Hashem created an astounding miracle that caused the tens of thousands of Syrian soldiers to flee for their life. From what? From an imaginary thought. That is a miracle. Yeshuat Hashem keheref ayin. The salvation appeared as speedily as the blink of an eye. Wow. And we hope that should happen in hard days as well. But I want you to notice what happened over here. From all the people in this story, we see that the Yeshua was announced and brought to Am Yisrael through the 4 Metzoraim, the 4 lepers. If a person is a leper, he engaged in some kind of sin, one of 7 sins. The top one being lashon hara, evil speech. The tzorat comes upon a person who is not doing the right thing. And yet, the ones who delivered the good news of the Yeshua, of the salvation, were these sinners. The good news did not come from the Navi himself. Elisha Navi was not the one who announced the Besorah. The Chachamim of that generation, the elders, the wise men of the generation, the scholars, were not the ones to announce the miracle to the people. Rather, HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose these 4 lepers to deliver the message of salvation. He chose the sinners to announce the Yeshua. Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu do that? Chachamim tell us, perhaps, because every so often we need a message from Shamayim, from above, that forces us to understand what it truly means to be a Jew. What does that mean? What does that mean? A Jew is a child of Hashem. That's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu told Moshe Rabbeinu alav shalom to tell the Jewish people in Sefer Devarim, in Deuteronomy. Banim atem laHashem Elokechem. You are children to your God. That means even a sinful Jew who sinks to the lowest place and is devoid of spirituality will always be considered a ben, a child. It doesn't matter what we did or what we do. It matters what we're a part of. Of course, that doesn't mean that we should engage in all kinds of sins, But the point is that our status of banim does not change even when we do sin. When we connect to other Jews in an effort to unite and to become one nation, we become whole. We become great. The greatness of Am Yisrael, like these lepers, is the ratzon, the willingness that comes from even the lowliest Jew. And in order to demonstrate that truth, HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought about the news of the Yeshua, of the salvation, from the last place we'd expect. Hashem brought the news of the miracle from the Jews who were michutz lamachaneh, outside the Jewish encampment. He brought the news of the Yeshua from the people we want to have anything to do with, from the ones who we'd walk right by and not even wish them a Shabbat Shalom because we want as little to do with them as possible. He brought the Besorah Tovah from the ones who we've shunned and removed from the city. So Hashem says, there is no perfect Jew, but I see perfection in my children. Banim atem laHashem Elokechem. You are all considered my children. No matter how far my child has gone or how low he's sunk, he's still my child, and I deem him worthy even when you don't. Chachamim tell us that for this reason, Sefirat omer, the counting of the omer, was earmarked for us to contemplate and think about the issues that we have with one another. Ben Adam lechavero, between man and his fellow man. Well, and that's what happened with the Talmidim, with the students of Rabbi Akiva, alav shalom. The students of Rabbi Akiva were great Torah giants, of whom to speak about is very difficult because they were so holy. We can't judge their errors because they were on an extremely elevated level of spirituality. But Chachamim do tell us that there was a flaw they possessed even on their exalted level. And that's that they were not able to honor one another appropriately. Lo nahagu kavod ze bazeh. That's the area that they needed to work on. And as a result of that, they actually died in a very severe plague that affected their lungs, and they were not able to breathe properly, and many of them died. Now, how do we know that that was the issue? How do we know that they were stricken with this plague because of their inability to honor one another appropriately? Because when the Gemara tells us their story and how the plague killed all 24,000 of the great students of Rabbi Akiva, that's a staggering number. What does the Gemara state? When the Gemara describes how they passed away, how do the Chachamim refer to the number of casualties? Their death is categorized as 12,000 zugot. 12,000 pairs. We're not told that 24,000 students died. We're told that 12,000 pairs died. Why are they being counted in pairs? And Chachamim explained that they each had a learning partner. Chavuta. You have to have a learning partner. They managed to associate and have respectful dealings with their own study partners, someone who they considered to be inside the circle. But the minute it came to someone else outside the circle, that's where they struggled most. Again, these were men of great spiritual stature. But Chachamim do inform us that because of that elevated level, the attitude that they adapted towards one another was not inappropriate for their level of spirituality. They were such Torah giants. How did they allow themselves to behave this way? So Chachamim wanted us to learn something from these great men. And one of the lessons is that no matter what level of spirituality you're on, Hashem sees you, Hashem loves you, and Hashem deems you worthy. And no matter how great you are, You don't have the right to decide who deserves your kavod and who doesn't. Who's worthy of your recognition and who's not. Who's welcomed and who's not. That's the lesson we learn in the story of these 4 lepers. That Am Yisrael can be saved even by those who in our eyes may not appear as the most perfect Jew. Think of the Metzorah, think of the leper. He's far from perfect. He was, after all, afflicted with leprosy because of some terrible sin that he committed. But what are we told concerning him? When he notices that he's been stricken with the leprosy, he runs to the Cohen, he runs to the priest, so the priest could examine the skin deformity. That's what the pasuk in Sefer Vayikra states. Listen to the words. V'ra'a haKohen et hanega be'or habasar. The Kohen looks at the nega, he looks at the lesion on the skin of his flesh. He examines the hairs on the lesion, and if they've turned white, and the appearance of the lesion is deeper than the skin of the flesh, it's then considered tzarat, leprosy. And then what does the pasuk state at the end? V'ra'ahu haKohen v'time'oto. And when the Kohen sees this, he shall pronounce him unclean. And that's when the Metzorah then has to be quarantined, and then he has to go michutz lamachane. Interesting. Weren't we just told at the beginning of the pasuk that the Kohen looks at the lesion? The pasuk begins with the words, V'ra'ah haKohen, and the Kohen looks. Why are we being told a second time at the end of the pasuk the same thing? V'ra'ahu haKohen, and when the Kohen sees, did the Kohen have to look twice? The answer is yes. The Kohen had to look at the affliction twice. Because when you're looking at the nega of another Jew, you shouldn't just look once. The halacha is that the Kohen has to look at the nega, and he's not permitted to give his opinion, his diagnosis, until he takes a second look. You know what we learn from this? That when we take a look at another Jew, and immediately decide that something is wrong with him, we should take a second look to be certain that we're not misjudging the situation, because banim atem laHashem Elokechem. All of Hashem's children are princes and princesses. We all belong to the royal family of Borei Olam. But sadly, we're so quick to write somebody off, we may not realize that the person we dismissed might just be the one who will bring the Besorah of the Yeshua. And that's what we learn from the story in Sefer Melachim. Think about it. Do you think that when the Jewish people walked by the city gates and saw these 4 lepers sitting there wrapped up in bandages because of their leprosy, that anybody walked over to them and asked how they were doing? These 4 lepers were probably wrapped up like mummies because of the tzarat, and when anyone walked past them, they turned away from them. They didn't want to interact with them because they were afraid of being affected by the affliction themselves. They didn't want to associate with them because those lepers were now michutz lamachaneh. They were outside the encampment of the Jewish people. So it was all about how they felt, what they wanted and deemed correct and incorrect. It was the I world that they were living in. And everything around the I was important to them. I think that. I feel that. I know that. I want that. I don't want that. I will not, or I will. I decide when. I assume that. It's all the I. It's all about the I. They were invested only in themselves. So they walked past these lepers because it was all about I. How will it affect the me, the I inside? What we seem to forget is that Am Yisrael was not founded on one person, on what he thinks and feels, but rather on the entire klal. Another Jew, other than me, said the words, Na'aseh v'nishma. We all accepted the Torah HaKadoshah together. You didn't stand there alone at Har Sinai. There was a multitude of Jews, different from one another, with diverse nisyonot on various spiritual levels, but we were all there, together. And if one letter from the Torah HaKadoshah, which represents every Jew out there, if one letter is missing, the entire Torah is pasul. It's considered voided and can't be used. If one Jew is missing in action in Am Yisrael, our nation is considered incomplete. That includes the leper. It includes the people you think are not on your level, the people you think have issues, the people you think need help, the ones you want nothing to do with. It includes all the Jews who are struggling with a world of nisyonot, and they might not respond to life in the same way you do. The Jew who doesn't keep the Shabbat as stringently as he should is still very much a part of Am Yisrael. Even the Jew who abandoned the palace and hasn't yet risen to his status of a prince is worthy, and his status has not changed. He's still the Ben Melech. He's still the son of a king. So all those Sefirat omer is like a ladder with 49 steps that lead to Matan Torah, to the giving of the Torah. Those steps are not meant only for my spiritual growth and well-being. It's about taking others into consideration, looking at them a second time and realizing that they too are climbing up the ladder, or realizing that sadly they haven't even reached the ladder yet. They haven't even approached the ladder yet. And more than anything else, you never know, not where the salvation is going to come from, not where, but from who the Yeshua will come from. As we see from the story of the 4 lepers. You don't know who HaKadosh Baruch Hu will choose to deliver you the news of a Yeshua filled with miracles. There are many people who we only discovered who they were, meaning their greatness, following their death. When they were alive, we didn't know how righteous they were. We didn't connect ourselves to them in the way that we could have. Many tzaddikim fall under this category. They're hidden from us, and we don't discover their greatness, sadly, until they pass on from this world. Well, there's a story about a man in Brooklyn, and if you lived in Brooklyn, New York, like I did for many years, you know exactly who I'm talking about. He dressed like a Hasid, and he was somehow always wrapped up in plastic all over his body. He looked like a homeless guy, and you could tell that he always bundled himself up with all kinds of sweaters underneath his black Hasidic garb, no matter what time of year it was. And this man would walk up and down the streets and into the gutters, between cars, in the middle of the road, almost oblivious to his surroundings. Most people thought that he was nuts, that he was crazy. But some, like me, and others, called him Mendel the Tzaddik, Mendel the Righteous. I specifically was zeicha quite a number of times to give him a ride. He would flag me down whenever he saw me, and he'd ask me to give him a ride. And quite often, he never knew where he wanted to go. I remember that one of the nights that he flagged me down, very interestingly, was Motzei Yom Kippurim. At the end of Yom Kippurim, I was in the synagogue, I was in shul the entire day. I didn't leave the shul. It was finally the end of Ne'ilah, and I was walking out of the shul. I left my car parked over there near the shul, and I walk into the car, and as I walk into the car, all of a sudden, almost out of nowhere, there was a knock on my window. And who do I see? Mendel, the tzaddik. I'm like, where did this guy come from? I didn't see him a minute before. Where did he come from? And how did he end up over here? How did he end up over here? I used to daven in a Sephardi Moroccan shul on Avenue P in Ocean Parkway. And what is he doing here in this side of town? And he asks me for a ride. And this was always the modus operandi. And this happened on Motzei Yom Kippurim. You're hungry, you're thirsty. He gave me one destination. And this, like I said, it's the modus operandi. He gave me one destination. And when we arrived there, he changed his mind and gave me another destination, which was usually at the opposite side of town. And then we would arrive at the opposite side of town. As soon as we got there, he changed his mind and bring me back to the original place, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And having him in the car was not easy because sadly he had an odor as if he didn't shower for months on end. But I remember one of the times that I did see him on the streets, I ran out of the car and I gave him a few dollars so he should buy himself something to eat. And as I gave him the money, I said to him, Mendel, can you give me a bracha? Can you give me a blessing? You know how he reacted? He was so upset. He gave me back the money and he said, I don't want the money. When you give tzedakah, when you give charity, you should never ask for a blessing, for a bracha, because it means you gave the money wanting something in return. So take your money and you're not getting a bracha, you're not getting a blessing. He refused to take the money until I understood the depth of what he was saying, and I was begging him and I was pleading with him, and I said, Mendel, please, you know what? I don't want a bracha, I don't want a blessing, I don't want anything, I just want to help you, I want to give you the money. So he said to me, you don't want a bracha? You don't want a blessing? I said, no, I don't want anything. He goes, you don't want anything? I said, no, I don't. I just want to give you the money and help you, and that's it. He goes, now I can take your money. That's when he took the money. But anyhow, he was known to ask many people for a ride, and many of us had the privilege of giving him a sightseeing tour of all of Bar Park and Flatbush in that same ride. And most people thought that Mendel was wasn't in his right mind. One day, he walked out of Landau's shul on Avenue L early in the morning, and he went up East 9th Street to some random house and knocked on the door. When he saw nobody was answering, probably because it was 7:30 in the morning, he held down the intercom button and he didn't let it go. How annoying is that? Finally, after 2 minutes of holding down the buzzer, he heard a woman's voice over the intercom. Who is it? And he said, it's Mendel. Immediately the woman thought, oh, it's Mendel, help. And then she said, Mendel, it's 7:30 in the morning. It's very early. What's the matter? And he said, is your husband home? 3 minutes later, the husband opened the door and he says, Mendel, what is this? I just came back from davening, from praying. I didn't even have breakfast yet. It's very early in the morning. I'm rushing to work. What's going on, Mendel? And Mendel said, I don't want to bother you or take away from your time. I just want to use your bathroom. Can I? The man said, sure. And he let him into the house. And anybody who knows Mendel knows he walks very slow. And he began to walk through this man's living room in this slow motion fashion. So the man said, Mendel, I'm sorry, but I'm in a big rush. I got to get to work. I don't want to be late. So please try to hurry it up. You're more than welcome to use the bathroom, but then please, got to go. I'm in a rush. So Mendel said, no problem. And he once again started to walk like a turtle. And then he stopped by a painting on the wall. And he tells the man, this is a very nice painting you have here. And the man was visibly frustrated, and he says, Reb Mendel, please, I have a bunch of meetings today that I can't be late for. I'm really in a rush. Please, just go use the bathroom. And then, right there, please, let's go. I have to leave. And Mendel says to him, yeah, don't worry. But he goes back to his turtle walk. And again he stops, this time in front of the man's china closet. And he says, wow, you have beautiful silver. This time the man blurted out, Mendel, enough. Use the bathroom and be on your way. And again Mendel said, yeah, don't worry. He finally made his way to the bathroom. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes later, he still hadn't come out. Meanwhile, the man didn't know what to do. He was literally pacing the whole way up and down in utter frustration. And after 20 minutes, he banged on the bathroom door and said, Mendel, is everything okay in there? And Mendel said, yeah, don't worry. I'll be out in a few minutes. Another 10 minutes and he still didn't come out. So the man banged on the door again. And again Mendel said, yeah, I'm coming out soon. The man looks at his watch. He realizes, oh my God, it's 8:30 already. I gotta get to work. I have to drive into the city. I'm already late. So he ran to his wife and he says, honey, I have a bunch of meetings this morning. I'm so late. I really have to go. I'm sorry, I'm going. And the wife says to him, are you crazy? You're not leaving me here with Mendel. You're not going anywhere until he doesn't come out of that bathroom. And this poor man didn't know what to do with himself. He banged and banged on the bathroom door, but nothing. Finally, Mendel came out and he said, I'm so sorry, thank you for letting me use your bathroom. And he once again began making his way through the man's living room in his usual slow-paced manner. And once again he stopped to look at another painting and another portrait on the wall, and he said, this is such a beautiful painting. And the man's going crazy. Can't take it anymore. He says, Reb Mendel, adios. That's it. Time to leave. Let's go. Out. And Reb Mendel finally made his way out of the house. The man grabbed his keys, ran into his car, and turned on the radio to hear the latest traffic report. But instead of hearing the traffic report, he heard that an airplane had crashed into one of the Twin Towers. That morning was September 11, and that man worked on the 97th floor of Tower 1. When the man realized what had happened, he began to cry, and he thought to himself, here I was thinking that I did Mendel a favor, but he did me the biggest favor. He saved my life. Ladies, we never know from whom the Yeshua will come from. We don't know who HaKadosh Baruch Hu will send our way to bring about some remedy, some salvation. Many times HaKadosh Baruch Hu will bring about the Yeshua. He'll orchestrate the redemption from a place or from someone we least expected. And Hashem does that in order to open our eyes to realize that every Jew is important and deserves our respect. And Hashem does that so that the next time we come across that person, we'll be inclined to treat him differently than the time we did before. We'll look at him in a completely different way. And that's what happened with this guy, with this man. After that day on September 11, that man who was in such a rush to get to work and couldn't wait to get Mendel out of his house, made it a point to go looking for him on the streets of Flatbush and used to carry bags of food with him just in case he bumps into him in order to give it to him. And whenever he would see him, he would offer to take him wherever he wanted to go. He suddenly had a greater appreciation for the man that HaKadosh Baruch Hu sent to literally save his life. And Reb Mendel never wanted to accept anything because as far as he was concerned, all he did on that day was use the facilities. Rabbi Akiva had 12,000 zugot, 12,000 pairs of students. They stuck to their pairs, and they were flawed in the area of ben adam lechavero. The lesson we learned from them in particular is that although our fellow Jew may not be exactly like us, or share the same spiritual endeavors, or have the same elevated status, although he may be different in his views and his personality, or he doesn't necessarily fit into our current social circle, but sadly, because of all those things that go through our minds, we dismiss him without a second thought, without a second glance. But then, these miraculous stories take place so that we could open our eyes to the truth. And the truth is that every Jew deserves to be treated and looked at in an honorable and respectful manner. So do you know what happened after 24,000 of Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim passed away? He began again from ground zero with just 5 Talmidim. And one of those students was the great Rabbi Meir Baal Hanes alav hashalom. Rabbi Meir's yahrzeit, his day of passing, is on the 14th of Iyar. He's buried in the holy city of Tiberia here in Eretz Yisrael, overlooking Yam HaKineret. And people come from all over the world to the gravesite to pour their heart out to this righteous man, this tzaddik, this great sage who was considered a miracle worker. Many miracles happened at the gravesite of this tzaddik, who was referred to as Baal Hanes, the master of miracles. And until today, the minhag is, the custom is, if you cry out the words, Eloha de Rabbi Meir Aneni, the God of Rabbi Meir, please answer me, it works. But interestingly, we don't use these words with regards to other rabbis. We don't say, Eloka de Rabbi Akiva Aneni, even though Rabbi Akiva was the leading rabbi and he was Rabbi Meir's teacher. We don't say Eloka de Moshe Rabbeinu Aneni. That's very interesting. There's one Rav who has the merit that when we're in trouble, we invoke his name and we could be saved. And that's Rabbi Meir Baal Hanes. Why? Why him? What was it about Rabbi Meir that when a person is in dire straits and he cries out, Eloka de Rabbi Meir Aneni, save me, it works? Well, first of all, the name Meir was not his real name. The Gemara tells us that the name given to him at his Brit Milah, at his circumcision, was Nehorai. Now, Nehorai means light, from the word Or. But where did the name Meir come from? Well, the word Meir also comes from the word Or. It means to illuminate. Meir is one who illuminates. So he was referred to as Rabbi Meir because he was Meir. He illuminated the world with his wonderful chidushim on the Torah. But not only that, the Gemara informs us that he was gadol mechaverav. He was greater than his Talmudic colleagues. And for that reason, the halachot, the laws, were not followed according to the opinions of Rabbi Meir. He was so deep and so otherworldly that most people just didn't understand him. Most people didn't even understand how he came to the halachic rulings that he did. And if you can't understand the halakha, you cannot follow the halakha. Therefore, whenever there was a dispute in Torah law and Rabbi Meir usually argued with Rabbi Yehuda, the halakha always followed Rabbi Yehuda alav shalom. Why? Because Rabbi Meir was such a Torah giant that his rulings and opinion were not always clearly understood by his peers. He was on such a high level that most people simply didn't understand him. But guess what? There is a place in the Gemara where the halakha, the law, does indeed follow the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Which halakha is that? This is a machloket in the Gemara, a dispute in the Gemara between Rabbi Yehuda, as usual, and Rabbi Meir on the following words, which you've already heard in the shiur. Banim atem laHashem Elokechem, where God in Deuteronomy and Sefer Devarim said, you, the Jewish people, are considered my children. Rabbi Yehuda says in these words the following: Bizman she'atem nohagim minhag banim, as long as you behave like the children of God, atem kiruim banim, you'll be referred to as children of God. And atem nohagim banim, but if you don't conduct yourselves as children of God, and atem kiruim banim, then you're not referred to as children of God. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. He says that as long as we're observing the Torah and we're devout and observant, we're considered the children of God. But Rabbi Meir argued Rabbi Yehuda's conclusion, and he said no. Ben kach uben kach banim atem laHashem Elokechem. Whether you're observant or if you abandoned Torah life, you're still considered a child of Hashem, and you will always be. Rabbi Meir said, you are Am Yisrael no matter what. So remember never to lose the value of another Jew. Never look down upon a fellow Jew because he matters in the eyes of Hashem in the same way you matter. Because banim atem laHashem Elokechem. And that's very interesting, because from all the debates in the Gemara, this one machloket is the one where we abide by Rabbi Meir's ruling. Banim atem laHashem Elokechem, halakha ke Rabbi Meir. We follow the opinion of Rabbi Meir on this one point. Maybe now we can understand why. Because when Rabbi Akiva had to begin all over again after having lost 24,000 students who fell short in the area of ben adam lechavero, of treating each other honorably, Rabbi Akiva decided that the next 5 students would be spearheaded by Rabbi Meir's view, which was banim atem laHashem Elokechem. He taught us that we should never look down upon another Jew or treat him in an undeserving way, no matter what we think. And that's the tikkun for the death of these 24,000 talmidim. And that's the tikkun that we have to make in our day and time. And that's the ladder we climb during these days of Sefirat omer. We're all on this ladder together, hoping to rectify and finally be redeemed. And one never knows who the Yeshua will come from. As a matter of fact, Chachamim teach us that in the end of days, we're all going to be surprised as to who the Mashiach is going to be. It's not going to be the person you thought it would be. It's going to be someone you least expected, someone you probably didn't even regard as grand, as great. The Mashiach will be, and he will come from the most unexpected place, because the Yeshua, the salvation, comes from the place and the person we least expect. That's amazing. So I want you to imagine the following scenario. Imagine there's a person who doesn't feel that he's a part of the Jewish nation anymore. He's experienced many challenges in the Orthodox circles. He has many nisyonot that he's faced. And sadly, he took it out on Judaism, on Yahadut. He took it out on Hashem's Torah, on Hashem's Torah, which is the truth. And he distanced himself from his Creator, from Hashem. You come out of your house, and as you're walking down the street, you cross paths with this person. You look in his direction, and you offer him a smile, and you say, hello. To you, might not mean much. But what does that smile and hello mean to that person? Let me tell you a story that took place in Chile many years ago that answers this question. There were three mashgichim, three rabbinical supervisors who worked in the slaughter plants of Chile. Now, several hundred people worked in this huge slaughterhouse. And of course, with such a massive plant and hundreds of employees, you could imagine what kind of operation was being run over there. It was a vast operation. Anyway, these three mashgichim, their job was to supervise the slaughtering to ensure that it's being done in the proper fashion. So they checked the salting and soaking process. Of course, before that, the shechita, the actual slaughtering process. They oversaw the entire process of kosher meat from beginning to end. One day, towards the end of the workday, they decided to check one of the freezers. And they walked to the freezer, inspecting all the meat that had already been through the koshering process. And just as they completed their inspection, they turned around to walk out, and they couldn't believe what they saw. The door to the freezer had closed, and they were locked in. They didn't know what to do. They began to bang on the door, but the door was so thick, nobody was able to hear them. They were yelling, screaming, but to no avail. It was the end of the day, and most employees were making their way out of the plant, if not already out. They were already out. After 30 minutes in the freezer, these three men felt the cold penetrating their bodies. Another 20 minutes went by, and they looked at each other, realizing that they were not going to make it. They were dying from hypothermia, and no matter what they did to try to keep warm, it just wasn't helping, and the clock was ticking. After an hour and a half, they gave up. They sat in the middle of the floor, and in their state of hypothermia, freezing and shaking from the cold, they began to recite the vidui, the confession prayers that one recites prior to death. The moment they finished the vidui, they collapsed. Suddenly, the door to the freezer opened up, and a Spanish guard ran in and pulled them out. He called an ambulance, and Baruch Hashem, thank God, the life of each of these men was saved. The following day, everybody at the plant heard about the three rabbis who were trapped in the freezer and saved by the Spanish guard. And they were all curious to know what happened. So they went over to the guard and they said, what happened? The size of this plant is so big, it's over 1.5 blocks long. There are over 25 different freezers. What made you think to even check? I mean, how did you even know the rabbis were missing? How did you realize that you need to look for them? There's like 800 people working in this plant, and these were the three you decided need help? You know what the Spanish guard answered them? That's exactly why I started looking for them. There are hundreds and hundreds of workers here, and not one of them acknowledges me or offers a good word. But these three rabbis were different. Every single morning they made it a point to stop wish me a good morning, and ask how I am. And then they thanked me for being here. They told me that my job was important. They told me how much I'm needed. They made me feel like $1 million. And at the end of the day, they would wish me a good night and tell me again what a great job I did that day. Every day I waited for these rabbis to talk to me, to acknowledge me. I looked forward to their good morning, and I looked forward to their good night. So yesterday, when everybody was leaving, I realized I never got a good night from any of them. And I wondered, what happened today that they didn't wish me good night like they did all the other days? And I so much look forward to them wishing me a good morning and a good night that I realized something must be wrong over here. So I started running around the entire plant looking for them, but they were nowhere to be found. So I thought to myself, maybe they're stuck somewhere. Maybe they're stuck. So I started to check every possible freezer, and I found them in the 5th freezer. Wow. What saved the life of these 3 Rabbanim? Decency, derech eretz, the recognition and the kavod of a human being. Kal v'chomer, the recognition of a fellow Jew. Ladies, these are the days and the climbing of the Sefirat omer ladder. Because during Matan Torah, we accepted the Torah as a nation and not as singular individuals. What does the pasuk state? Vayichan sham Yisrael neged hahar. We all encamped near the holy mountain. And how were we encamped? Ke'ish echad belev echad. Like one man with one heart. That was one of the conditions of accepting the Torah. If Am Yisrael is not united, ke'ish echad, like one man, united as one, then the Torah has no power. So every single year we're given the opportunity to relive the moment at Har Sinai. During the days of Sefirat omer, what are we doing? We're trying to achieve unity and togetherness in Am Yisrael, so that by the time we do reach Shavuot, we are able to say, we are here, ke'ish echad, belev echad, that we're united and not divided. And since the students of Rabbi Akiva failed in this regard, we mourn their loss specifically during this time, which is when they died during this time, and we remember what the tikkun is during these days. We also have Rabbi Meir's teachings, and it's very significant that his yahrzeit falls out smack in the middle of Sefirat omer. But Rabbi Meir reminds us, ben kach uben kach banim atem laHashem Elokechem. No matter what a Jew does, he'll always be regarded as Hashem's child. Therefore, we should never look down upon a fellow Jew. That's a very powerful message. It's the message of, you never know who will bring about the Yeshua. You never know who you need to help create the salvation for you. It might just be the one person you least expected or thought about. It might be the person you denounced, shunned, or considered in a negative way. It might be the person you deemed unworthy, the one who is michutz lamachaneh. And no Jew is unworthy or undeserving of decency, respect, and love. Yeh ratzon that we merit to use these days to actually ascend the ladders in ways that God wishes us to. That we take advantage of this time period and do our best to unite. May the journey of these days lead us not only to the highlight of Chag HaShavuot, which is the giving of the Torah, but that our efforts to be the Ish Echad, Belev Echad, bring with it the ultimate salvation of the final Geula with Rachamim. אמן כן, יהי רצון.
ממצרים גיירתנו, מבית עבדים ותיסונו. ממצרים גיירתנו, מבית עבדים ותיסונו. ממצרים